Hello, it's Daniel Bryant here. Before we start today's podcast, I wanted to tell you about QCon London 2024, our flagship conference that takes place in the heart of London next April 8th to 10th. Learn about senior practitioners' experiences and explore their points of view on emerging trends and best practices across topics like software architectures, generative AI, platform engineering, observability, and the secure software supply chain. Discover what your peers have learned, explore the techniques they are using, and learn about the pitfalls to avoid. I'll be there hosting the platform engineering track. Learn more at qconlondon.com. I hope to see you there. Hello and welcome to the InfoQ podcast. I'm Daniel Bryant, and today I had the pleasure of chatting with Solomon Hykes, co-creator of the Dagger project and of course the original Docker project. We touched on all things continuous integration and continuous delivery and covered everything from why there is currently a need for new abstractions for building software, all the way through to the impact of licensing such tooling and donating, or not, such projects to foundations like CNCF and the CDF too. I've been following along with the Dagger project for quite some time and experimented with the latest quick start just before chatting to Solomon. I could see the connections with existing tech such as Docker files and build packs, and it was fun to be defining application build steps using a node-based Fluent API. However, the conversation helped me join the dots for the bigger picture of where modern build tooling like Dagger fits in and how the ecosystem could develop to support a set of reusable build modules and components. So, welcome to the InfoQ podcast, Solomon. I'm sure many of our listeners will know you from the .cloud days and, of course, for kickstarting the Docker and container revolutions. But for those folks that haven't bumped into you, could you introduce yourself to the listeners, please?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Solomon. I'm the co-founder of a startup called Dagger. And before that, I was the co-founder of Docker. And I'm an undercover French. I sound very American, but I grew up in France. And so now I live in San Francisco and having a great time working on new tech and learning from this great DevOps community.
Fantastic. So much innovation going on in this space at the moment, right? So we're definitely going to dive more into that, Solomon. And I'd love to dive more into Dagger in particular. But I wanted to set up the context for the listeners. Like, what's the problem space you're working in? I know it's like sort of CI/CD scoped, but yeah, what's the actual problem space you're working in, and why now to spin up a tool, a company around this space?
Yeah. Well, there's a personal answer and I think an industry answer. The personal answer is that I spent 10 years of my life on Docker. And then I took a break because I was tired. And then we kind of brought the band back together and wanted to build more things. So we just set sail again and went out there and talked to people about their problems and honed in on the pain to try and help fix it.
Like it.
And discovered that a lot of the pain was still related to application delivery, build, test, deploy. And so we can help with that. So we just sort of took our experience and skills and transposed them into today's problems because some things are the same 10 years later. Some things have changed.
Yeah.
And yeah, I guess I went from personal to industry answer. It feels like a continuation of what we started, of what we set out to do. I started on this whole container thing in 2007, 2008.
Yeah, well.
And it is just one big arc. And the arc is, it should be easy to ship your code into a live application in the cloud, but it just isn't.
Yeah.
And we're still kind of trying to climb that mountain together as an industry. And for us personally, that started with trying to build a PaaS, platform as a service.
Of course.
That was the big hope. And then we discovered collectively that had flaws.
Yep.
And then we pivoted to a much more modular model where the first step was, let's build this foundational ecosystem around containers. We need that.
Yep.
And then we just spent 5 years doing that. And now I think we get to build the next layer on top of that, and sort of bring back the best of the original ideas of PaaS.
Yeah.
And of this new thriving modular container ecosystem.
Fantastic.
So we're still trying to solve delivery of applications to the cloud,
Yeah.
I think we may actually solve it. I mean, it's been so long. I think people are used to the problems as being not solved and the experience being overall not great.
Yeah.
We just got used to the duct tape.
Yeah.
But there are people like us and many others that are still, solving it, making it better.
Yeah.
We got to do it. There's too much duct tape.
Fantastic. But if I was chatting to Adam Jacob from System Initiative a few weeks ago, we had him on the podcast,
Yeah.
and he was like, if you look at the 10-year gap, we've actually got the same process, but different tools, right? And I wonder if you've got any thoughts on that, as in, granted, you're building a new tool, and so is he, to be fair as well, but do you think we're going to need to fundamentally change the way we approach the delivery of software to make these big changes?
I think it's been a continuous change ever since this whole DevOps and cloud thing started. So I think now we're steeped in it. And so we forget how much things have changed already.
Yeah.
Speaking, for example, for one little area of this huge stack, right? Docker and containers, I mean, the concept of a Docker file, of building a container around the application, that was completely new and weird when we came up with
I
it.
remember.
And we ourselves were like, wow, this is an interesting hack. Let's see if it goes anywhere. And it was very unnatural. And we had to explain it a lot and defend it. And now I talk to new grads, who are starting their journey now, and it's just they don't even know how it was before.
Yeah, makes sense.
So I think each year as new people enter the industry and we old timers kind of learn and adapt as much as we can, everything kind of shifts. I just think that there's a lot more of that coming.
So Dagger is pitched on the website as CI/CD as code that runs anywhere. Now, I like that pitch. It was a nice sort of marketing pitch, but could you break it down for the engineers in the room, right? For the folks that want to be using this, developers, operators, platform engineers, what does that actually mean?
Right now, our main audience is the DevOps engineer, the platform engineer, the person whose job is to make the developers on the team more productive.
Yeah.
And over time, we think Dagger will become more and more accessible to the point where developers can use it directly. But right now, at this time, that's not really the case, unless you're a very DevOps-minded developer.
Interesting, yep.
And the problem we solve for that designated DevOps person, whoever they may be, is that the experience of creating and maintaining these pipelines that ship the application is just a pain.
Yeah.
And the reason it's a pain is it's made of duct tape. And the duct tape involves a lot of shell scripts and YAML.
Yeah.
And, the duct tape straddles these two worlds of the development environment where you have to build and test and sometimes deploy from the dev environment directly, pre-push. And then there's CI, post-push, where typically pushing and you get commit will trigger actions, things will happen, tests will run, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what I call the pipelines, the delivery pipelines. And over time, those got more and more complex. And as the application grows, the complexity grows exponentially.
Yeah.
And someone has to wrangle these and keep them working and improve them and keep up with the application development. For example, if the application team adds a new component, new database, new framework, new anything, new AI tool.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Someone has to add those into the pipeline. Otherwise, it's like saying, oh, we have this new feature in the car that we're building, but it's only available in the prototype. Therefore, it's done. Well, no, it's not done. You got to manufacture the thing.
Yep.
So someone's going to have to incorporate that into the manufacturing of the software. So this is really, it's a software factory problem. And it's just that as things scale and the applications become bigger and they move faster and the stakes are just generally higher.
Yeah.
These factories have to go from little artisanal workshops, which, let's face it, that's the reality of 90% of software shops, to an actual factory. And that transition is just painful. So we're proposing a way to do that is not ridiculously over-engineered and actually solves specific problems. And so the specific problems we're focusing on are, number one, something we call push and pray. I'm changing the pipeline. I'm adding something to the CI pipeline. How do I know it works? Well, I got to commit it. I got to push it. I got to wait for the CI server to pick it up. And then I get a red thing that says, oh, you forgot a space, and then I have to do it again. And so you have these 40 Git commits. Please work. Okay, this time I think I got it, And so if you think of these pipelines as software, it's like a specific kind of software that ships your application, then that's just a terrible development experience for that software. So we're telling that designated DevOps person, your pipeline should be code. It should be software. We call it pipeline as code, for example. And so here's a reasonable tool to do that. An engine that will run it locally or in CI. It'll run it the same on both. So you can actually develop locally. And when it works locally, you can run it in your CI and there's a reasonable chance it'll work the same. And it's not locked into this proprietary black box, because that's another problem DevOps people have. There's different CI platforms and they all have a different proprietary YAML language. And so if, God forbid, you have to migrate from one to another, or maybe you work in a larger organization and you acquired a company, now you have to deal with two. It's okay to have two different infrastructure services, two compute providers, that's fine. But two completely different platforms to express the logic of your pipelines, that's really damaging because now you can't compose different pipelines together into a bigger pipeline. You have silos forming. So anyway, there's a whole list of problems, some small and subtle, other, very painful and obvious, that we think can be solved in a major way by changing how you think about the pipeline from a collection of shell scripts and YAML to proper code that you can develop properly. So that's the core focus for us.
I like it, Solomon. I think definitely myself, with my sort of wearing my Jenkins hat back in the day, right? I recognise the pain of some of the things you mentioned there. I'm sure many of our listeners sort of coming from that era of the Jenkins and the run deck, and as you said, it's moved through like different tools now, so it totally makes sense. You mentioned a bunch of things there. Could we break down the components within Dagger? Because I know there's Dagger Engine. I played around a little bit with that, and then there's Dagger Cloud and there's Dagger SDKs. Could we sort of walk through what all those things are and what they do and when I'd use them?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's really two big parts. There's an open source engine that we call the Dagger engine, and that comes with, there's a core engine, really, a core component, and then there's a command line tool that lets you interact with it, and then there are SDKs, as you mentioned, that let you program it, because the whole point of this engine is to run your pipeline logic written in your code. And the SDKs are really important because they're available for major programming languages that are familiar to teams already. Python, Go, JavaScript, TypeScript. There are experimental SDKs being contributed now by the Dagger community. So there's a Java.
I was going to ask about that in a minute, actually. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Java, Rust, Elixir.
Wow. Elixir. Interesting.
Yeah. And they're experimental, but they do work. And the whole stack is really neat. The SDKs are generated from a common API reference. So the engine has, in fact, a GraphQL API.
That makes sense. Yep.
And that's really just a kernel. Think of it as like the operating system for your pipelines.
Yep.
And you can have it run all these operations that are based on containers. And then these SDKs are just generated bindings in the language of your choice to do that.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So it's relatively easy to create new SDKs, and it'll become easier. So anyway, that's the engine, all of that. We can just call it the engine,
Yep.
And then on the other side, there's Dagger Cloud, which is an optional collection of services that are run in a centralized way by us and that are designed to remove obstacles to adopting the Dagger engine in production.
Yep.
So what happens is you start your journey with Dagger, designated DevOps person hears about Dagger and they realize, oh, this could help me solve these problems that I have. Pipeline's too slow, push and pray, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
So let me go and try it out on my laptop. So they develop their first pipeline. They will go through the quick start like you did.
Yep.
And then eventually you get to something that you like, that's useful. And now you want to get your team to use it. Mm-hmm. And so part of that is getting them to use it in their dev environment locally.
Yep.
But at some point you need it to run in your CI.
Yeah.
So you can retrofit it in your existing workflow.
Yeah, makes sense.
Because we don't replace your existing CI.
Yep.
We don't replace Circle CI, GitHub Actions.
Yep.
We give you something to run on top of it, right? That's the beauty of it. And so when you do that and you start running this in production on your CI, it works really easily. But operationally, you realize, okay, there's some things I need now to hook this up, to upgrade my CI stack, to Daggerize it.
Yep.
And one of them is caching, and the other is visualization of the pipeline.
Makes sense. Yep.
Yeah. And so I can go into those, but so we just add these solutions and then you subscribe to our service and then you connect it to your engine, but it's a bring your own engine solution.
Yep.
We don't run the pipelines for you.
Oh, interesting.
You run them anywhere you want.
Okay.
Yeah, that's an important part of it because there's so many ways to run a CI pipeline already, so many compute providers.
Yep.
We think really CI compute infrastructure should converge with general compute infrastructure. The fact that it's so siloed and, bundled together.
Yeah.
A lot of these CI platforms, they bundle proprietary software for, configuring your pipelines and proprietary hardware. We run your pipeline.
Yeah.
And lately there's been, so much pressure that now reluctantly some of these providers are adding a way to self-host, but it's still sort of a weird special category of compute. We think it should just be regular compute. So we really are unbundling CI as a category and splitting it into a pure software layer and infrastructure. And we're clearly on the software side. Mm-hmm. And I think everyone in this market is going to have to choose, okay, what is their focus? Are they the best compute provider, the best possible machines to run your pipelines?
Yep.
And there's a new generation of providers out there focusing on that. Or are you the best software platform for it? And, that's what we're going for.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. And just to sort of double down to make sure it's super clear for the listeners, because I think a lot of folks are used to using things like Jenkins, and you mentioned GitHub Actions, and they are sort of very different but very similar in terms of their goals. And something I heard from you there, and I also was lucky enough to watch the talk at QCon SF where the presenter, Connor, also mentioned this as well. The migration path is quite nice as well, right? You don't have to rip out everything in one go.
Yeah.
You can, to your point, if I'm using Jenkins, I can literally call your binary, right? I could call Dagger dot or Dagger whatever,
Yes.
and then gradually migrate things over. Because I'm always super cautious of the big bang, right?
Absolutely.
Big bangs generally result in big bangs, which is not a good
Yes.
look. So, like the migration path, I think would be super interesting to listeners as well.
You're right. That is a very important part of how Dagger works. And we were very deliberate about it. You can adopt Dagger incrementally
Nice.
by retrofitting it into the stack you have. That includes the CI platform you have, but also the build tools you have, the dev environment you have. It's really designed for minimal friction.
Yep.
And by the way, so is Docker in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Two things are true at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
We want it to be incredibly easy and seamless to start using Dagger, and you can do it in a very small way. Typically, what we're seeing is 90% of your CI is fine.
Yep.
And then 10% is a complete dumpster fire.
yeah, anecdotally makes sense.
It's slow. It's costing tons of money.
Yeah.
There's an urgent change to it that's needed, but no one knows how.
Mm-hmm.
The person who built it just went nuts and then left the company.
Yeah.
It's written in a language no one understands. It could be any reason.
Yep.
And so typically what happens is you use Dagger as a fire extinguisher. You Daggerize that 10%.
Gotcha. Yep. Mm-hmm.
You replace that mess into 40 lines of perfectly clean Python or Go or TypeScript.
Yep.
And then, like you said, you just remove 400 lines of shell and YAML.
Yeah, right.
And then you replace them with 2 lines in your existing configuration that say, run Dagger with this thing.
Gotcha.
And so it's very incremental. Then hopefully that really helps and you get the hang of it. Your dev team grows familiar with Dagger.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is over time, there's no big bang replatforming. Like you said, those always fail.
Yeah.
So developers aren't forced to use the new thing. Oh God, what is it this time?
Yeah.
But it's just like, serendipity sets in.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this is the pipeline now. Oh, I know this. This is Python. I know this.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I see. This is very straightforward. It's going to run my build tool at this version in this container with my source code mounted here. Okay, but now I want to use this flag. Let me go open a pull request. And
nice.
All of a sudden, this big black box that is the CI pipeline, that is usually a bottleneck because only the designated DevOps person understands how it works and they're always overworked.
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden you're starting to spread the work around. And before you know it, all these big principles of platform engineering and digital transformation that everyone's talking about, but they're hard to implement because they're implemented via a big bang replatform that fails, like we said.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, no one has to talk about it. It's just kind of very gradually happening. That's our focus.
I like it, Solomon. And something caught my interest there as well. You mentioned like everything is built or done within a container. And I'm thinking in part of the migration, I might already have Docker files, right? Or I might already have build packs. But personally, I love the CNCF build pack projects. Coming back from like Heroku days, I still long for my build pack, right? Can I migrate from then? And perhaps even what is the relationship between, say, the Dagger SDK and things like the Docker file and a build pack?
The goal of Dagger is to integrate all the pieces into a pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you have a Docker file, the goal is that you can integrate a Docker build with that Docker file into the pipeline.
Yep.
If you have a build pack step, the goal is that we can integrate that into the pipeline. And so modularity and the ability to customize is really, that's the killer feature.
Yeah, nice.
It is an integration tool. Pipelines are about integration.
Mm-hmm. Yep, totally.
And whoever can integrate more things better in a more robust way, wins.
Yep.
And so we think of it as replacing duct tape with Lego.
Interesting.
It's still modular.
Yeah.
It's still all about changing and customizing, but it's robust.
Yeah, gotcha.
It's sane and it can scale better. So that's really the core of it. And yeah, I could give specific examples around build packs specifically or Docker files, but like Docker file, that one's easy because of the tech we're using.
Yeah, right.
We're building on tech that was made in Docker, BuildKit, among others.
Yep, of course.
This team basically started and was involved in back at Docker. So we're very familiar with it. We know where the good parts are. We get native compatibility with Docker files. So that's just,
awesome.
It's a native call in the Dagger Engine API. You just say, Docker file over there, give me a container. And you're actually using the same implementation as Docker builds. It's not like these Red Hat reimplementations where they try to get as close as possible, but it's hard being compatible.
Yeah.
So Dockerfile is a really solid compatibility. And then build packs. And all these custom tools, there's a whole community of Dagger knots, we call them,
Very nice. Yep.
that are basically packaging them up into reusable modules.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I've heard about this. Yeah, so much Adrian Mert tweeted about this. Yeah, yeah.
Right, yeah. So it's a feature that's in development. It's actually in there in the latest release, but it's hidden because we're not quite finished.
Gotcha.
But it adds cross-language reusable modules.
Oh, very interesting. Cross language.
So someone can say, I know build packs. I know the CNCF build packs tool. I'm going to package it into a set of functions that are completely encapsulated. They're running on containers. And so they'll run the same way anywhere. And they have an actual API with types in, types out. And there's a build function that takes a directory as input.
Yeah, yeah.
And it produces a container as output. These are fundamental types in the Dagger API. And then you write them in whatever language, Go, Python. Really, under the hood, it's going to orchestrate running the right build pack tool in the right container with all the inputs and outputs hooked up. And so it wraps all this container machinery into an API.
Nice.
And that API can be called from any other Dagger pipeline across languages. So you can write yours in Node.js.
Yeah.
That module can be written in Python and they can call each other. So that's sort of the missing piece for all this to make sense, because then it unlocks an actual software ecosystem.
Yeah.
Where all these bits of DevOps knowledge can actually be implemented once properly and then reused, which is so obvious for an application development ecosystem.
Yeah.
But in DevOps, that's not how things work. You read a blog post that talks about another blog post about how someone did it once, and then you find a piece of a Helm chart in a Docker file, and then you copy paste some parts, then you start over again, and everyone's just reinventing the wheel again and again. So that's the reward of all this stuff we talked about, doing it all in code with a clean foundation, making it Lego-like. Eventually, the reward is I get to reuse the work of other people in the DevOps community.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm not sure if this is related, but it sounds almost WASM-like, right? So I'm going to all the WASM talks at the moment. I'm reading the WASM blogs, and they're all the same. It's the same promise, right? I can write in Go and Rust, and we can do eventually cross-function calling. Happy days.
Yeah.
And I mean, are you doing any of that under the hood, or is this just more a case of you're running it in containers, so the language doesn't really matter?
Well, so the short answer is we're doing it all in containers. We don't use WebAssembly.
Cool.
I'm very familiar with what you're talking about. In fact, back at Docker around 2016 or so, things were already taking off. And for a short while, we mistakenly at Docker thought, okay, smooth sailing from here on the core platform. Let's start thinking about the future, the next layer. And so a lot of the stuff we're doing now, 2016, 17 is when I shifted my focus towards trying to build it at Docker. Really, let's make all this a platform. Let's make all this programmable. And at the time, WebAssembly was an obvious choice.
I remember your tweet now, Solomon. I know you said it, the famous tweet, right? If WASM was available. Yeah, of course.
Right. Yeah. So that tweet was sort of like the only output from these. So we actually set out to build a WebAssembly team in 2016 and make a big investment there. And it ended up just not shipping anything because it turns out we were not done with the core work on containers. So it was, I think we set out to try and do too much. So it turns out it wasn't Docker's role to do that. But at the time, we did look at WebAssembly as the vehicle for almost a Trojan horse.
Yeah, interesting.
And the thinking at the time was everyone's got a Docker CLI and everyone thinks it as just a regular client.
Yep.
But what if that client could be scripted, programmed even, and you just kind of sneak a little bit of programming in this tool, and over time, people learn to use it for more and more powerful things, and before they know it, they're scripting their whole deployment.
Yeah, right.
And boom, a new platform appears, So that was the vehicle that seemed to make sense at the time. And then you definitely needed something lightweight enough to embed in a Docker CLI. So something like WebAssembly or Lua really were the only two options.
Yeah.
So that was very exciting to me. Now I think we're just in a different place where for our purposes, making application delivery pipelines programmable, containers themselves are so ubiquitous.
Yeah.
And the ecosystem is so amazing. And the problems in pipelines today are so terrible and basic.
Yeah.
It's not rocket science. It's just that there's a missing standard and a missing upgrade to the state of the art. WebAssembly is just too much.
Interesting.
You can solve most of the problem with just good old containers.
Yep.
But you just got to get people to adopt an API and make all this duct tape into code.
Yeah.
And containers are actually good enough, at least for now.
Yeah. That's fantastic, Solomon. I love your thinking points around that. That's really helpful. So just to sort of wrap up at least that part for the listeners, there'll be a future where you have some maybe kind of marketplace or library or portal or something where I can go and pull in all my different modules.
Yes.
And then really I am only writing a little bit of glue code.
Yeah.
And to your point, when I was playing around with the Node SDK, I was like, oh, it's just like promises. And it's really obvious. Like it's all Fluent APIs, right? I'm just chaining stuff together.
Yeah.
So the idea was like, I kind of wondered at the time, I was like, oh, I'm going to have to be writing a bit of code here. But the future could be the fact that I get a module and then I only do the code that's necessary to join it all together.
Exactly. Yeah.
Very cool.
And it's, to be clear, this is a feature that's going to layer on top of what's already there. So it doesn't change the APIs. It makes it much more accessible because, like you said, instead of having to write a complete software project on your own in order to leverage Dagger, which is very powerful, but it sets a higher bar. It means in practice today, most of the successful deployments of Dagger are in medium to large DevOps teams, but everybody needs this, not just medium to large teams. We just need to make it a little more accessible. And so the way to make it accessible is, okay, 99% of what I need is already in a module. There's a high quality, easy to consume marketplace. We call it the Daggerverse. You go and search and you find the module you want. And then depending on what you need, you can either write a little bit of your own module and make it, 10 lines, 20 lines, 30 lines of code, just little functions, not a huge project. And then you just call these powerful existing primitives. Or another thing you can do is sometimes the module actually has exactly what you need. It's like a Swiss Army knife. And really all you need is you want to call that function in that module from the command line, from a shell script directly. You don't even need to write additional code. We're also adding that feature. So, a lot of bigger shops have what they call the paved roads,
Yeah, golden paths. Yeah.
Yeah, 80% of the work, you just use this template.
Yeah, I like that.
And then, for the remaining 20%, you can go and customize. So the way everyone implements these 80% right now is boilerplate, a generator that just dumps something on your repo and then you kind of modify it from there. But PaaS actually had a better model there where you just provided your code and then the platform took care of building it the right way, setting up the load balancer the right way, all of that stuff. So that can be a module, so part of the Dagger community that's emerging from this Daggerverse project are higher level modules that are basically a paved road in a module. So because it's Lego and these things stack really well on top of each other, the reward is just like code. It's not shocking to use a Go library that calls another Go library that goes, it works. So you can have a module that you call from the command line and it's, simple app. And you look at the function doc and it says, okay, you need to give it a source code directory, an API key for, the Vercel account or whatever, a name for an app and a host name, whatever. And then you just provide these from the command line, boom, boom. And then there you go. It's deployed. Very useful for, ephemeral staging deployments, all these complex motions that are usually out of reach for most teams. You barely have CI/CD at all. If you want on-demand environments for anyone, forget it. You can't do that in a custom way, but now it's just a module. So the goal is to make this really accessible to everyone. You need any sort of DevOps automation, it should be one command line away.
Yeah, I love it. So I didn't quite get the full bigger picture there. I'd kind of gone up a couple layers of abstraction, I think, from the quick start, but I like your vision of like the golden path because everyone pretty much I'm chatting to at the moment is striving towards that, right? And people are like, what is the abstraction? Is it copy paste YAML, which I've got a gut feeling it's not, to your point.
Yeah.
Even like with Pulumi, for example, and Terraform, seeing the values of libraries and modules and even those kind of abstractions was really powerful. So I like what you're pitching. It's almost world domination in the CI space, right?
Well, we'll start with CI.
yeah, there you go. I like it. One thing that did really come through, Simon, is the strength of the community. Something actually, when I chatted to Adam Jacobs, he said the same thing. You've got to get this critical mass, and it sounds like you're doing very well with that, with the Daggerverse and the Daggernaut. Love the branding there. I'm guessing, like, to build this critical mass, and to touch maybe the third rail for a second, you've got to think about licensing, right? You've got to think about community. It's a hot topic at the moment, maybe a controversial topic, but would you think about donating Dagger to a foundation like CNCF, like the Continuous Delivery Foundation? What do you think about the licensing model here? Because there's quite a lot of play for folks to want to invest in the community, right?
Yeah. So there's two really important things here. First, community is everything for something like Dagger. And so, we are a startup. Yep. We have investors, we have a team that is hoping to have joined a successful business. So we have a strategy for growing and succeeding. And that strategy we call community-led growth. That's the actual name of our strategy. So the whole point is to create a thriving, fast-growing community in the DevOps space.
Yep.
And the community is about people who are excited about, a shared objective. They're excited about learning from each other, helping each other, and it's building around a brand and a product, but it's bigger than the brand and the product,
Yes, totally.
It's a group of people that just love building things together, and it's really hard to get right.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of effort and dedication because you have to take a leap of faith that it will pay off later.
Yeah.
And that's basically, we've made a decision to go all in on that.
Fantastic.
And so now it's starting to pay off, and it took several years.
Yeah.
But now, well, like you said, we have the Daggernauts. We have a Discord server that is like the beating heart of our community, and it's just a lot of fun. Our team hangs out there all day long. We don't actually have a separate private server.
Oh, interesting.
It's the same Discord server with private channels.
Yeah.
And so we're literally in there all the time.
Yeah, cool.
So that's the first part of the answer. Community, super important.
Yeah.
And it's got to be authentic,
Yeah, it has to be, right? Has to be.
You have to actually believe it. The founders have to be involved. So me and my co-founders, Sam and Andrea, we're always interacting with the community. And I think we've succeeded in creating a culture where everyone in the team, it's 25 of us, actually cares deeply. So you'll see if you go on Discord, which I hope you will do. And
I must join afterwards. Yeah, totally. Yes.
Yeah. Let's say you come in and ask a question, a basic question because you're getting started. Hey, I saw your tweet, FYI, I had a missing JavaScript dependency.
Yeah.
And I didn't see it right away in standard output. Let's say you come in and ask about that. You may get an answer from one of the core engineers who's doing their magic in the core, doing something impossibly hard. They're not out there, in an ivory tower saying, oh, I'm not going to go talk to users. Everyone's there just having a good time. So that's really valuable and precious.
Love it. Yeah.
And we're going to protect it at all costs. And we think it'll lead to world domination.
Nice. Yeah.
Because that's what you need to create a new standard.
Yeah, totally.
And just change how people work. So that's the first part. The second part, the CNCF thing, to me, that's completely different.
Yep, makes sense.
That's not a community.
Yep.
To me, that's an ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's an interconnected network of projects and companies like ours that will sometimes compete, sometimes collaborate. But in the end, that's our area of the industry. We're solving a problem in tech together.
Yep.
And institutions like CNCF and these foundations, and even the norms of open source development, the rules of engagement, that's usually valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And in my opinion, you don't want to mess with that.
Yep.
You want to, be a good citizen.
Yeah.
But I think of it differently as community because collaborating properly as a good citizen with your competitors.
Yeah.
And future partners, collaborating in creating technical standards, whatever.
Open standards. Yeah, I love that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Deciding if you want your license to be OSI compliant or not.
Yes.
All important decisions. But I think of them as different from community because the people you interact there, they don't really care about Dagger, right?
Yeah.
It's not a bad thing.
No, I'm with you. Yeah.
It's different. So community versus ecosystem is how we think about it. And there's a connection, of course.
Mm-mm.
But to answer your question, we will never donate Dagger to the CNCF.
Oh, interesting. That's a bold, obvious, great statement. So I was curious. Yeah.
And we're comfortable explaining why. It can be open source and have a real community that is undeniably there and true. And also say this is our community built on our product. And it's open source, so you can fork it and go and build a competitor. And by the way, good luck to you because this is going to move fast, if we do a good job.
Yeah, right.
That's part of the game, in the open source ecosystem. So we're not going to mess with that. We don't have any plans for, weird licenses or anything like that. In fact, Adam and I are very aligned on the playbook there on how to connect open source and business. And it's basically the Red Hat playbook, which is extreme openness on copyright. In other words, the codes, the software, which is really your license, and extreme control over your trademark and how it's used.
Ah, nice.
And because that's your brand, that's your identity, that's not free for use, And that's something, by the way, we did not do well at Docker. We were naive about it.
The whole Moby project and things like that.
Moby was an attempt at fixing it, but it came too late. It was too little too late. But, basically, we did not protect the Docker brand enough. We allowed too many participants in the broader ecosystem to do whatever they wanted with it. We didn't feel great about it, but we didn't realize how strategic it was to be decisive and clear. Ironically, we were too worried about everyone loving us. So we were afraid to make clear statements about what is okay, what is not okay. What is our position? We just wanted everyone to love us.
Yeah, that's understandable.
Yeah. And so as a result, the opposite happened. Everyone got increasingly frustrated because everyone projects their ambitions, their hopes, their dreams, and then they're not all compatible. So someone's going to be disappointed.
Yeah.
And then, that led to some drama at the time, I think mostly forgotten now. But yeah, the lesson for us is be clear, be straightforward, just say what you're going to do and then do it.
Yep.
And if someone's going to disagree with it, it's better if they hear it early.
Yeah, I hear you on that, totally.
So we're saying the engine is open source. It's real open source. You can fork it, it's there. No plan to change it. I can't guarantee that if we get bots, the next owner will change that. I mean, there's no good mechanism for that today.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah.
But we've set up our business model so that we don't need to change the license to succeed because we're selling this cloud service.
Yeah, that's where you're making your money. Yeah.
On the side, yeah.
Yeah.
And the trademark, you can't mess with that. You can't redistribute Dagger in any modified way and call it Dagger. We're not going to let that happen.
Yeah.
And we won't donate to a foundation because it's not a neutral piece of technology. It's a complete platform.
Oh, I was kind of curious where the connection was there in terms of not the donation, but then you say you want to be super clear on you own this bit and then the rest of it sort of open source in the community. And
yeah, I think foundations are great for low level components and technical standards.
Interesting point. Yeah.
Where product opinion and subjective design and user experience are not important.
Interesting way to look at it. Yeah.
And that was really a lot of the misunderstandings, I think, in Docker. I've always been very forceful and cared a lot about user experience.
Oh, yeah. That came through in the product for sure in Docker. Yeah.
And, when things align, then the results are great. That's kind of our secret sauce. That's how we achieve things that others don't.
Yeah.
But it does require focus and ownership so we can say no to things.
Yeah. Yes.
It's a big part of good design is you have 10 good ideas. There's 100 bad ideas.
Yeah.
But then there's 10 awesome ideas and you can only do one. Because if you do all 10, the result's going to be bad. So that's painful and tedious. That's part of the work.
Yep.
And it's hard. And it's hard even if you're in full control. But if you come in and let your competitors or partners or just random participants dictate what your user experience will be.
Yeah, interesting.
It's not going to be a good user experience. And so that's why anything that requires that kind of product-minded focus, product excellence, design excellence, it cannot be donated to a foundation because it won't be a good product, But over time, you can spin out well-scoped, low-level components.
Like BuildKit with Docker as an example kind of analogy?
Yeah, well, actually, BuildKit was not spun out into a foundation. But yeah, it was at least spun out into a separate repo. So yeah, it is a good example. But yeah, that actually, there's an open question that we're interested in flipping the tables here as a participant in Docker's BuildKit ecosystem. We want BuildKit to succeed, but we want BuildKit to be open and neutral.
Right. Okay.
And so it would be a logical conclusion for BuildKit to be donated to a foundation so that Docker can build their product on it.
Yeah.
We can build our product on it. And there are others, there's a good dozen.
I see a lot. Yeah.
Gitpod uses BuildKit. Octeto uses BuildKit. Depot uses BuildKit. There's a lot of really interesting things being built on BuildKit. So that's a great candidate actually for a neutral component, but it's not fully realized. But, the canonical example would be Run C, OCI. Containerd is a great example. Containerd is, I think, the perfect example. And it's a very successful implementation of taking something that was nested deep into a product. And we at Docker decided to spin that out. No one forced us, but people asked for it. And we realized, okay, this is a good idea. We will be able to share the burden of developing this low-level component. It'll be more reliable, etc. And we still get to control our user experience, so everybody's happy.
Yeah.
Dagger at the moment just isn't large enough to have its own components inside of it, except BuildKit. We're building on top of BuildKit.
Fantastic. That was super clear definition. I've never really heard about the product and the UX aspects of it in that way before, and that totally makes sense. And my bad, I did think BuildKit was already in the foundation. To be honest, I see I bump into it so much, but I do take your point about those low-level components being perfect candidates, right, for extraction. Yeah.
BuildKit is in the Moby project, and the Moby project was our attempt at Docker to open up more. And I think in the end, CNCF ended up being the right vehicle for it. Because as open as Moby was, it was still Docker projects only.
Right.
So if you take the analogy of Red Hat, Moby would have been our Fedora.
Yes.
It's open, it's community-based. There's a lot more room for building your own products on it, but it's still the Docker stack.
Yep.
with a bunch of Docker opinions in it.
Yes.
And so most of the projects in there, we ended up spinning out into CNCF instead.
Yeah.
I'm not sure why Buildkit actually is not there yet. I think it just got caught in the, I don't know.
Everyone's busy, right? Everyone's busy doing stuff. That's the thing. Because again, just one of my things. I see it so much in many projects. I'm very lucky. I just Cormac, and I just assume it was CNCF, right? Yeah.
We're talking about it with them. And I mean, I've shared with Docker that I think it's something that is in Docker's interest to do because
interesting.
Buildkit is a really powerful ecosystem in the making.
Mm-mm.
But, it does require some nurturing.
Yep.
And, a 25 people startup
Yeah.
can only nurture so much. Docker now is much more successful in a larger company. And, Tonus, the creator of Buildkit, works there. So, I think we'll see some gradual steps towards it. And Justin Cormac is keenly aware of this, and he's got a lot on his plate,
Fantastic. Now, I'm conscious of your time. Really appreciate the insight you provided today. Just as a sort of wrapping up point, is there anything you want to share with the listeners, or particularly around the future directions? I know we've covered that pretty nicely, to be honest, but anything you want to leave the listeners with would be much appreciated.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because sometimes I talk to people about DevOps and application delivery and CI/CD, all those words that have been around for quite some time now.
Yep.
And there is sometimes an assumption that it's a solved problem. It's this thing that's there that's not really moving. And sometimes it gets in the way. That's just how it is. And, let's just kind of focus on more exciting things in the future. But I think what people don't realize is that you can't ship the future without fixing the factory that's going to build it and get it out there. And so you can't really, as much as everyone would love to just forget about Jenkins and YAML and shell scripts and just step into a bright future that's completely ready for us.
Yeah.
Pipelines are just a reality of life, and it's going to get fixed, and when you look at something like AI and all those amazing capabilities that are coming up now.
Yeah.
We're in the really early days of discovering these capabilities, right?
Yep.
Prototypes, labs, a few products here and there, but 99% of AI products that will exist are not shipped yet.
Yeah, point taken. Yep.
It's really a universe of experimentation and tinkering.
Yeah.
All of those products will need to somehow be shipped and built and tested and monitored. So DevOps is here to stay, and it's about to go through the massive transformation. And I think this excitement around AI will be the catalyst for it. It's the excuse that we DevOps and cloud people now have to go get our respective management to finally invest in upgrading the factory.
Good analogy. Yeah.
And so I think that there is an incredible interdependency, and there's an opportunity for the AI community and the DevOps community to really help each other achieve their goals.
Yeah.
And I think it's just going to energize both parts of the industry. So I think we're about to enter a really exciting phase.
I'm here for it. Fantastic. As a long-term Jenkins survivor. And way too many YAMLs in the Kubernetes world. I'm totally sold, Solomon. So I like what you and several folks in the community are doing with this sort of bringing it all together. I think it totally makes sense to me. Fantastic, Solomon. It's been amazing chatting to you. Thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.